All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This webinar is really under the category of transparency, and SonicWall wants to be as direct and as transparent as we can. And we've just been through a very busy week, so we want to walk you through what happened this week, the process we went through to figure out what was going on, what we figured out what was going on, and then our recommendations for remediations and then go forward. So I'm lucky to have people much smarter than me on the webinar with me today. That's Doug McKee, our Executive Director of Threat Research, Michael Crane. Michael is our General Manager of our Managed Security Services Business Unit, and Corey Clark, VP of Threat Operations. All I know is those titles sound a lot better than mine. Mine is Head of Marketing, so you can tell they're much smarter. So with that, I'm just going to throw you guys into this one, kind of summarize what just happened, what we went through, and kind of where we are now and what we need to. And you're probably either a SonicWall employee or a partner that's kind of still catching up with what just happened and what's going on. And so if one of you just wants to take this and kind of give us a little bit of insight of what just happened.
Yeah, I'll jump in there, Robert. So over the weekend, we saw two things start to happen over this past weekend. Is we saw an uptick in some of our telemetry. We monitor firewalls for events that are occurring that could be problematic or issues that we need to address. And so we saw an uptick in some of that telemetry and those reports. And then we also at the same time, or around the same time, started getting reports from some big IR firms. So Arctic Wolf, Huntress, Google Mandiant reached out to us saying, hey, we're seeing some suspicious activity. Are you aware of anything occurring in this type of attacks? And it was all focused around the SSL VPN capability of the firewall. And so immediately we jumped on reviewing our own telemetry, and we jumped in collaboration with these other IR firms to figure out, hey, is this a new thing that's happening, or is this an old thing? What's going on with these potential compromises of the SonicWall devices? And so that kind of sparked this whole investigation, and then the information that we've been releasing all week.
Okay, and initially there was some concerns that this was a 0-day, that this was fresh and new.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's kind of the question, right? When you don't have an answer that you can easily pin to, it's like, is this a new attack that's happening? So we put that under a new vulnerability that's being leveraged. We put that under 0-day, or is this something, maybe an old vulnerability that attackers have found a new way to leverage? And so that was the first thing that we had to try to answer when we were seeing this activity. Is this a new thing or an old thing?
And then we'll talk about what we finally discovered and what the remediations are to it now. But how big was this? Meaning, we've got 1 million or whatever firewalls out there. How big was this?
Well, I mean, obviously, anytime you have 1 million near some odd firewalls, that's a big number. So this could have been a really massive compromise if it was such. But as we started pulling in the telemetry and looking at this, what we started to realize is that there was a common denominator that started to show itself. And it was really focused around our Generation 7 firewalls that had the SSL VPN enabled. So we were quickly able to bring that down to about 50,000 firewalls. So we went from 1 million to 50,000 pretty fast, then trying to really look at, okay, making sure that one, we find a way of communicating to those partners and customers, ensuring that we could get advanced notifications out to them because they were at most risk. From there, what we found is we had about 200 reported cases that it was being suspected. Some of it was fear, some of it was I don't know, some of it was, hey, I just don't even know if I've been compromised. And getting through those 200, what we found was about 50-ish credible cases. And from those 50-ish credible cases, some of it was in a, how do we say this? I don't want to say bad words, but we're just going to say that maybe it wasn't the best configurations in the world.
Less than desirable configuration.
Less than desirable configurations. We found some open RDP without using VPN into environments. We found MFA not being used at all. We found firmware on firewalls that hadn't been updated for 3 or 4 years. So you could kind of almost rule those out really, really quickly. And that got us down to a point of about maybe 20 confirmed cases where things were happening. And even in those 20 confirmed cases, I will say there's some still less than desirable. Maybe your GeoIP wasn't enabled. So, from 1 million down to 50,000, down to a couple hundred, down to, 20, 30-ish really confirmed cases is what this came down to after a few days.
I mean, that's a pretty small number, Michael. And I see this. So this is the world I live in, is responding to these. And it makes sense. A lot of confirmed cases, a lot of fear, right? And uncertainty, because a lot of people don't realize that adversaries work in campaigns, kind of like we were used to the old marketing campaigns, right? They're getting the snail mail marketing browsers and stuff, and there's campaigns that happen. Well, adversaries do campaigns, and right now there's an Akira campaign happening. And so, of course, when you start seeing Akira ransomware, an uptick in it, which we saw early in January as well, now we're seeing another campaign happening. There's a lot of fear. And then so you have these IR companies saying, okay, we're seeing an uptick in this. We think it might be related to a brand new 0-day. Come to find out it's related to an older vulnerability. And then obviously come to find out what we've been preaching about, the undesirable configurations. And I'm seeing it because I've, in the last 24 hours, I've had to respond to 2 Akira ransomware events, diving into it, getting a root cause analysis. It's like we're finding the same thing. We're finding MFA enabled, or there's one account that wasn't enabled, or there's an account that has too many privileges that it shouldn't have. We're seeing allowing MFA or VPN access to everybody in your environment, which shouldn't happen. Now, in this particular case, I always talk about geo-filtering and geo-blocking, because if none of my employees are working in China, as an example, I'm not going to allow China as part of my VPN. It doesn't make any sense. Why would I allow it? But in this particular situation, we're seeing them using server farms within the country of origin that particular customer's in. So geo-filtering, in all, people call us out, in all realism, wouldn't have helped in this particular attack as so far of what we've seen. But it's one of those important steps that you need to put in, because while it might not help you in this exact scenario today, it's going to help you in the next attack.
I think an important thing too that you're talking about when you're talking about campaigns and things that help us draw conclusions on whether we're talking about a new 0-day or a reuse of an older vulnerability is we didn't see that kind of exponential curve of, hey, there's new code that's been released and there's new proof of concept code or something to that effect where threat actors are taking advantage of this. Typically what happens is we see those numbers move up very quickly. In fact, what we saw within I'm going to argue 48 hours to 72 hours, we start seeing the numbers go down, right? Instead of seeing more executions of these type of reports, we were seeing less, which also brings us back to part of the correlation of saying, okay, this might not be some new thing. This might be kind of focused on a certain particular cases.
So what was it? What did we figure out?
So we've determined that majority of the activities related to a CVE that we published about a year ago, CVE 2024-40766, which is a CVE centered around improper access control, which was a vulnerability back in our Gen 6 firewalls, and that vulnerability can lead to other scenarios on the device that provides access. But one of the most notable things that vulnerability is being leveraged for, and we've seen this over the last year, is stealing local user account credentials. And so one of the things that makes that difficult is when threat actors choose to leverage those accounts, may or may not always be immediately. And then when a threat actor does leverage stolen credentials, it doesn't look like an attack, right? It looks like someone logging in, which is part of what can make the analysis of what's happening additionally difficult as well. But one more correlation that kind of helped us draw to the conclusion is we saw a lot of the confirmed phase. So Michael was talking about, around 20 confirmed cases that were related to this incident. A lot of it had correlation to do with firewalls that went from Gen 6 to Gen 7. And as a result of that, in some cases, Michael talked about and so recorded less than desirable configurations. One of those less than desirable configuration was credential reuse from the Gen 6 to the Gen 7 environment. And without making those modifications in credentials when moving, if the vulnerability was leveraged while you had the Gen 6 firewall in place and you migrated those credentials over to Gen 7, well, now you're Gen 7. Again, it looks like someone's just logging in, and it's actually a result of that previous vulnerability being leveraged. And so that's what we determined in the cases that have been reported to us. That's the outcome.
Yeah. All right. And so we figured it out. Confident we figured it out. What are we recommending now? What are we telling customers, partners it needs to be done?
I think there's a couple things right now that we're recommending. One is updating the firmware version to 7.3. We're not saying that 7.3 fixes the problem, but 7.3 has some enhanced protections against brute force attacks and additional MFA controls. So we're learning as we continue to grow and as we continue to do these things. And because we know that these brute force attacks and MFA controls, we've put additional features in there. Some things like password complexity, forcing password complexity so that it's not just using a six letters, not really putting any complexity to it. So putting some of that in there. And also when we start to see certain aspects of what's happening in a potential MFA bypass attack, we've now got some countermeasures in there that can help with the admin lockout, failed attempts, certain values that we don't want to necessarily say exactly what those values are because we don't want to go ahead and tip the hand, but making those also doing the normal everyday things, making sure that your botnet is protections in place. But like Corey said, with the GeoIP wouldn't have helped in this because there were server farms being used in the local country, but it will save you eventually. Remove any unused or inactive user accounts. That's a big one. I mean, we've seen that for years that it's gone on. I mean, think about the Colonial Pipeline attack. It was a employee that was no longer there. Enforcing MFA, that is still one that seems to catch us quite frequently. Resetting all local user account passwords. So any account that has SSL VPN access, especially if they were carried over during the migration from 6 to 7, make sure you change those passwords. Those are the best practices that we're recommending at the moment.
And to echo off of that, as a more general statement, I want everybody to go back and review the remote access policies. Review what you're currently doing, because too often we just get too complacent in what we've had set up for years and just forget about it. Look at your users, and not just in your firewall, but look, if you have Active Directory, go through your elevated privilege accounts, go through your domain admins, go through your enterprise admins, schema admins, and clean it up so that you're not reacting when an event occurs. You can be proactive and go through this. Because again, the thing we have least amount of is time. And so we get complacent in what we do and the configuration we have that's just working. People are, we have access, cool. But then something like this pops up and now we're blaming the tool. I will always say it. The tool is not what's going to save you here. It's the process and the implementation of the tool. That's the most important thing of how you properly implement these tools that you are using to help protect you and protect your customers.
As the hacker on the webcast too, I'll point out, and I think this is really important to know, is as my favorite blue teamers over here talk about MFA, right? I'm going to remind everyone that MFA is a tool in your tool belt, but is not a silver bullet, right? One thing that we see from threat actors and attacker techniques, I even teach some of these techniques for SANS, is how to get around MFA, right? And ways to bypass that. So and when you have access to other vulnerabilities on whether it's a piece of software or a device that provides you a little bit more access than you're supposed to have, that it can also be a tool that attackers will use to leverage to get around MFA as well. And so we definitely want to recognize that, of course, we want MFA enabled on every single account, on every single firewall, and that's best practice. But we also shouldn't get complacent. And like what Corey's talking about, we should be reviewing our configuration and reviewing our setup, because those techniques are not the end all to be all, right? There are ways to bypass that, especially if you can leverage another vulnerability within a system.
That makes sense. And I'll note for people who are listening or watching, there are links at the end of this we'll have to the knowledge base and advisory services and stuff, so people can read what you guys have been talking about. It also just is a reminder that firewalls or any security device, appliance, etc., is not a set it and forget it. It's got to be there. This is not a set it up and everything goes away. It's not like your toaster. And even your toaster, you got to clean out the crumbs now and then. Got to do some stuff. So, all right. Well, I guess that kind of, for the most part, kind of addresses the issues at hand. I do want to, I think we do need a nod to kind of our partners that did help in this. You mentioned the IR teams. You guys, you want to You want to name them and talk about that a little
Yeah.
bit? Because this was certainly a collaborative effort, which is a big key to this industry, obviously.
Yeah, it was a team effort for sure. We worked directly with Arctic Wolf. We were working directly with Huntress, Google Mandiant. In fact, we even had a Slack channel going where all of these companies were talking in the same Slack channel to get real-time updates and to collaborate research. We were sharing artifacts from different different attacks and hypothesizing together over what could it be. And I think that's really key in cybersecurity today, right? You have to be able to work cross company, because you know what, the threat actors really don't care. They don't care who your vendor is. They don't care what services you're paying for or not paying for. They care whether they can breach you, and most of the time make some financial gain off of it. There's other motivations as well, of course, but that's just probably the biggest one. And so that collaboration between our between companies and research teams is absolutely invaluable.
It's great. It shows we can play on the same playground together, and that's huge for the industry in general. Just so many cases in the past years where you see certain individuals posting YouTube videos showing how they circumvented some security solution, just throwing out there to get their own credit. Something like this is amazing, where two even competing vendors, multiple competing vendors, can work together for the greater good of the whole industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
think
awesome.
It's a really big deal. I mean, we even find ourselves like, are we a competitor with Huntress? In a lot of ways, yes, we are. We have a SOC, they have a SOC. We have an MDR, they have an MDR. Same thing with Arctic Wolf. But this was where a time that being a competitor was put to the side and we all collaborated together. It's a team sport. I mean, look, these threat actors, they're using AI, they're using ML, they're acting as a team. And it shows that in a moment when there's a potential crisis happening, that we can all come together and do it well. We can do it well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Big thanks to all of those companies.
Yeah, shout out to Gray Noise as well. The collaboration continuing going on with them and looking to help set up honeypots and things like that. It's been awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you. I'll kind of close on. We got a little bit of feedback that we weren't communicating as quickly and as often and was ever on these. And it is always a challenge. It's when do you say and what do you say. I will say, and Corey, I'm interested in your perspective here in a second. I do know we do have some things we're going to improve in terms of how we communicate to customers and partners. To be really frank, we use some of the same technology to try to sell you stuff as we do to try to communicate with you. We're going to fix that. So we know when we push the button, you're receiving the message, because we believed that we had sent to all customers and partners. And the feedback we got was, well, we didn't get it. So that will be solved.
It's tough. Yeah, it's tough. There's always lessons learned, right? One of my best interviews I've did of someone, he outright called it. I learn best from my failures than I do my successes in general. We all do, plain and simple. And communication's hard. It's kind of like reports. Everybody wants great reports, but nobody can say what it looks like. And person A's idea of a perfect report is different than person's B. Right. So we have to find the happy median. And, there's changes, obviously, that have been happening in SonicWall as a general with the acquisition of Solutions Granted. And, SonicWall typically hasn't had a big presence on Reddit, for lack of better words, have its own subchannel, but isn't in the MSP subchannel. So we're changing. Things are changing, adoption on that. There's some people want updates every 6 hours saying, hey, we're still looking into it. But we wanted to make sure we didn't jump ahead of the game on this. And, we wanted to acknowledge, yes, this is an issue and we're investigating and we're working and collaborating with these other organizations to get to the bottom of this. Because this was different. All in all, everyone agrees this is a little bit different than typical vulnerabilities that we find in a product, right? Where we go in, we research it, we fix it, we patch it. This one kind of, I think, hit everybody out of the blue. Like, wait, what? Right? And so we have to properly communicate this, and we don't want to just go out there and put misinformation and redact it later. And so again, some want every 6 hours, hey, tell me you're still looking into it. Some are like, okay, don't tell me until you have a fix. It's finding that happy median, and we'll obviously continue to grow and get better with it going forward.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. All right, well, reminder at the end of this, we'll have links to the knowledge base, links to advisor services, all that stuff, so you can read for yourself. Guys, thanks a bunch. I think this is in the interest of full transparency and trying to lead, be authentic, and also learn from this stuff. Really appreciate you guys being on here and sharing. And thanks to everybody for paying some attention. Thanks a lot.